The Old Printworks. The Old Printworks in Stockport, England, was a labyrinth of dim passages and echoing rooms, a patchwork of 4 former terraced houses that had shed their domestic pasts to become a single, sprawling industrial organism. Its brickwork was soot-stained, its windows grimy, and its internal architecture a testament to hasty demolition and makeshift integration. Kevin, a night owl by nature and necessity, was its sole inhabitant after hours, a solitary figure amidst the clatter of idle machinery and the ghosts of forgotten deadlines. Tonight, however, was different. Chapter 1. The Cold Creep. The last of the day staff had clocked out around 6 p.m., their chatter fading into the damp Stockport evening. Kevin, a man in his late 40s, with a quiet demeanor and a penchant for strong tea, had settled into his routine. He'd checked the presses, organized the next day's paper stock, and was now hunched over a flickering computer screen in what used to be the front parlor of the first terraced house, meticulously adjusting a print layout. The building, even when empty, always hummed with its own particular silence, a mix of distant traffic, the occasional drip from a leaky pipe, and the gentle sigh of old foundations settling. Tonight, however, an unfamiliar silence began to bleed into the usual hum. It wasn't the absence of sound, but rather a listening silence, as if the very air was holding its breath. Kevin first noticed it in the periphery of his senses, a subtle shift in the air pressure, a fleeting sense of being watched from the corridor that now snaked through where a shared wall once stood. He dismissed it, blaming the extra strong coffee he'd had earlier, or perhaps the late hour finally catching up with him. Then came the sounds. Faint at first, like the scuttling of mice in the ceiling voids, were too rhythmic, too deliberate. Scratch, scratch, drag. It seemed to emanate from the back of the building, near the old loading bay that had been part of the 4th terraced house. Kevin paused his work, tilting his head. "Just the wind," he muttered, though there was no draught where he sat. A shiver, sudden and profound, traced a line down his spine. It wasn't just the ambient coolness of an unheated industrial space. This was an unnatural cold, localized and intense, that seemed to coalesce around his right side. He rubbed his arm, trying to generate warmth. The air in that specific spot felt heavy, stagnant, and utterly devoid of comfort. He looked around the empty room, his eyes scanning the shelves of paper and the silent, imposing silhouette of a dormant Heidelberg press. Nothing. Yet the feeling persisted, an invisible presence pressing in, a low, buzzing discomfort deep in his gut. The first hour bled into the second with an accelerating sense of unease, each tick of the clock amplifying the unsettling quiet. Kevin found himself glancing over his shoulder more and more, convinced he wasn't alone. Chapter 2. Shadows and Whispers. As the night deepened, so did Kevin's apprehension. The subtle scratchings from the back of the printworks had intensified, evolving into distinct thudding sounds, as if heavy objects were being dragged across a concrete floor. He tried to ignore them, burying himself in his work, but his focus was shattered. Each thud resonated not just through the old building, but through his very bones. He decided a walk-through was in order, a logical step to dispel the growing dread. Just the building settling, he told himself, grabbing his heavy-duty torch. The beam cut a path through the gloom as he moved from the reception area, through the main press room, and towards the rear. The air grew progressively colder as he ventured deeper, a chilling sensation that clung to his skin. As he approached the old loading bay, the source of the thudding, the temperature plummeted. His breath plumed in the frigid air, despite the building being relatively sealed. The darkness here felt thicker, more oppressive, and he felt an overwhelming urge to flee. His torch beam swept across the corrugated iron door, the stacked pallets, and the dormant, ancient binding machine. Nothing seemed out of place. But then, as his light briefly flickered across a stack of old newsprint, a shadow detached itself from the pile. It wasn't a sharp, defined shadow cast by an object, but a murky, shifting distortion, like smoke given form, that writhed and then vanished behind the imposing frame of the binding machine. Kevin froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. He swung the torch back, but the space was empty. His mind screamed, "Optical illusion," but his instincts screamed, "Run." He retreated, backing slowly through the cold, the feeling of an unseen presence dogging his steps. Back in the front office, he tried to calm his nerves, making another cup of tea, his hands trembling slightly. Just as the kettle began to boil, a low, guttural growl seemed to reverberate from the floorboards beneath his feet. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. A sound that bypassed his ears and went straight to the primal fear center of his brain. It was a sound of pure malevolence. Kevin's carefully constructed rationalizations crumbled. This wasn't the building, it wasn't the wind, and it certainly wasn't his imagination. There was something here, something ancient and deeply unpleasant. The feeling of being watched was now intense, a tangible pressure on the back of his neck. He felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone. The thought of running, of abandoning the shift, flickered through his mind, but a strange, almost magnetic terror rooted him to the spot. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that whatever was here didn't want him to leave. The second hour ended with the pervasive chill, the unseen eyes, and the lingering echo of a sound that belonged to a nightmare, not reality. Chapter 3. The Dark Room. As Kevin made his nervous retreat back towards the comparative safety of the front office, his torch beam swept across a doorway he knew well, the entrance to the dark room. This door was always kept firmly closed, a necessity to preserve the light-sensitive materials within. It was a heavy, solid door, and its base scraped audibly against the concrete floor whenever it was opened or closed, a distinctive gra sound that echoed through the otherwise silent building. But now, in the weak arc of his shaking torch, Kevin saw it. The dark room door was open, a sliver of impenetrable blackness yawning into the already dim corridor. He hadn't heard the telltale scrape, hadn't heard any sound of it moving. It was just open. A fresh wave of dread washed over him. Had he left it open earlier? No, he was meticulous about such things. The thought made his stomach clench. As Kevin stared at the open dark room door, a wave of primal fear surged through him. He knew that gra sound. The door couldn't open silently. His eyes darted around the office, landing on a heavy iron poker leaning against the cold, disused fireplace. With a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline, he snatched it, the cold metal feeling strangely reassuring in his clammy grip. His other hand fumbled for his phone, dialing Maureen's number without thought. "Maureen? Don't hang up," he rasped, his voice tight with a fear he couldn't hide.
"Kevin, what's wrong? Are you okay? Where are you?" Her voice, clear and sleep-laced, flowed through the receiver. "Just stay on the line, Maureen. Just stay on the line," he repeated, his gaze fixed on the menacing sliver of darkness that was the open dark room door. He took a shaky breath, the iron poker held like a lifeline. I need to check something." "Kevin, what are you talking about? What's going on? Are you safe?" she pressed, her voice now laced with concern. But Kevin could only offer the same desperate plea, his eyes unwilling to leave the dark opening. "Just stay on the line, please. Just stay on the line." He began to move slowly, deliberately, towards the open doorway, the phone pressed to his ear, his heart hammering in his chest like the thudding from the back of the building. Chapter 4. The Long Dawn. The final hour of Kevin's shift became an agonizing eternity. The growl, though not repeated in its full intensity, seemed to linger in the oppressive atmosphere, a low thrum beneath the surface of the building's silence. He huddled in the office, his back to the wall, casting nervous glances at every shadow. The cold was now pervasive, seeping into the very fabric of the old terraced houses, making his teeth chatter uncontrollably despite the layers of clothing. Suddenly, a loud bang erupted from the press room, directly adjacent to his office. It sounded as if a heavy metal plate had slammed onto the concrete floor. Kevin jumped, his chair scraping loudly. He forced himself to peer through the doorway. The press room was dark, the machines barely visible hulks. He flicked his torch beam into the room's space. Nothing. No shifted plate, no disturbed tools. Yet the sound had been undeniable, deafeningly close. Then, from the old staircase in what would have been the second terraced house, a staircase that hadn't been used in years, its steps groaning and splintered, came a slow, deliberate creak. Then another, and another. Someone or something was descending. Kevin's breath hitched in his throat. He could hear the distinct weight of each footfall, the wood groaning under an unseen mass. He squeezed his eyes shut for a terrifying second, then opened them, half expecting to see a monstrous figure emerge from the gloom. Instead, a profound guttural sigh seemed to fill the room, directly behind him. It was a cold breath, foul and ancient, that caressed the hairs on his neck. Kevin spun around, his torch beam wildly sweeping the office. The air was thick, suffocating, and the cold was unbearable, a sharp, biting frost that pierced his clothes. In the corner of the room, near the old filing cabinets, a shadow writhed. It wasn't just a darker patch of gloom. It was a deeper, more profound blackness that seemed to absorb the light of his torch. It pulsed, a malevolent heart beating in the darkness, and he could feel its gaze upon him, a palpable weight of hatred and despair. He stumbled backwards, knocking over his tea mug, the ceramic shattering on the floor. His only thought was to get out. He fumbled for his keys, his fingers numb with cold and terror. The shadow pulsed again, seemingly expanding, contracting, as if breathing. He heard a faint rasping whisper, too indistinct to form words, but laden with menace. It was right there. Just as the panic threatened to consume him, a faint gray light began to filter through the grimy windows, the first hint of dawn. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the oppressive cold began to recede. The thick air lightened, the profound blackness in the corner seemed to diminish, shrinking back into the normal shadows of the room. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted slowly evaporated, replaced by a profound, draining exhaustion. By the time the sun's first weak rays truly touched the highest panes of glass, the old printworks was back to its usual, eerie silence. The extreme cold was gone, the shadows were merely shadows, and the only proof of his ordeal was the shattered mug on the floor and the profound trembling that wouldn't leave his hands. Kevin didn't wait. He locked up, his eyes scanning the building one last time, an unspoken promise to himself that he would never again work a solo night shift in the old Stockport printworks. As he walked out into the crisp, ordinary morning air, the weight of the night lifted, but the memory of the evil entity, its cold touch, and its menacing presence would haunt his thoughts for a very long time. The old building, now bathed in the weak morning light, looked merely old and dilapidated, its secrets once again locked within its thick, silent walls. But Kevin knew better.
Epilogue. This story is actually based on true events. My father, Kevin, and mother, Maureen, did indeed run a printing business in Stockport, England, back in the 1970s, from premises just like those described. For the purposes of the old printworks story, I updated the time frame to include a computer and cordless telephone, which actually did not exist at the time of this incident. The noises, the dark room door being open, grabbing the poker, the fear, and the phone call are all true. As a young and curious little boy, I would often explore the printworks. The dark room was always a particular interest to me. When my grandfather passed away, his wooden leg was sent to my father at the printworks, and he stored it in a cardboard box in the dark room. The absolute curiosity to investigate this legacy, pardon the pun, superseded my fear. I would open the dark room door, not easy as it scraped on the floor, and peek inside. I remember my father shutting me in the dark room one time to teach me to keep the dark room door closed. Boy, did I scream, but it taught me a valuable lesson. That night terrified my father. Other members of staff would not work a late shift under any circumstances, all saying that they felt uncomfortable and at unease. Of course, they had their own stories to tell. I hope you enjoyed the old printworks. If you did, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and adding a like. It really does help. Thank you, and stay safe.